We always wonder what happens to a deputy governor of the Bank of Ghana after he's left the bank. What have you been up to?
Well, normally after we leave office, we live very quiet lives. You can decide to leave the country, take other appointments, or you live within, but basically you do your own thing. In my case, it's been interesting. You need a whole interview for me to tell you what I've gone through. It's not been easy. A lot of unfortunate things happened to me. Things that should not have, been allowed to happen. But God being so good, I've survived it all, and I'm here. So I've been around, and I'm still here.
So you've not been able to take up any appointment?
Not at all. I got appointments. I even had an appointment with the African Development Bank, but because they kept me in court, for about 7 years now, I couldn't go for reasons that were not at all tenable. I don't know what those who are doing this gain from this type of thing, so I've been around.
Yes. I guess that'll be a discussion we'll have some other day.
Certainly.
Yes.
Certainly.
But I'm guessing all this has to do with your tenure as deputy governor at the bank. Now, we all know the state of the financial sector now.
Yes.
They always attribute it to your management of the sector, that when they came, they had to do some work on the sector to resuscitate it. First of all, do you accept that perhaps your actions also contributed to where we are?
Not at all. Not at all. I say not at all because, you see, a process was ongoing, when they came in 2017. And you remember what happened from the doomsaw, days. So that whole shock that we had as a country had impacted on the banking system. So non-performing loans, had gone, quite high. In fact, I remember they were quite high, but not as high as we have currently, across the banking industry. And so because of that, some banks, had become insolvent. And so an audit process was launched. This was in 2015. So initially that audit process was to end in December 2015. So that by then we get a clear sense of which banks were insolvent. However, the passage of the ESLA Act in 2015, December 2015, I think it was on the 15th of December 2015. The ESLA Act, once it got passed, it meant that those banks that had very high non-performing loans due to energy sector related exposures, their status had changed. So it is like a man who is dying, who you think is going, but suddenly starts breathing. You don't shut down the oxygen. You wait, you give him some more time to observe. And so decision was made therefore that we should extend the AQR size to June 2016. And remember, during the time, banks were doing a number of things. The reports are out there. They were perfecting their collaterals because that also was, impacting on them. Some of them were bringing additional capitals. Of course, you would always have a couple of banks who are doing excessive things, but that's normally a very small, part of it. So decision was made that let's extend this to June 2016, by which time there will be clarity, by which time payments under ESLA and then the other things would have come in. And so we'll now see clearly which of the banks are now alive, which ones are truly, dead. Now, come June 2016, the exercise was still ongoing. Some of them were still perfecting those collaterals, they were bringing some additional capital little by little, etc. And then there was another constraint. Under the act at the time, the act for the banking industry, which was there before 930, before this one, that act made it very difficult to close down any bank. Because under that act, you needed to apply to the High Court. Even before that, you needed to give shareholders 6 months to show whether they can bring in additional capital or not. So the act did not permit the central bank to just move in and close down any bank, especially the private banks. So based on that, you couldn't just go. If you go the next day, they'll go to court and then they set aside your decision. And then there will be pandemonium in the whole country. So we saw it necessary to pass a new law, which will give us the powers to move in, and when we close down, we close down. Even if there has to be a court process, there will be an orderly way of going about it. So that the old act made it, nearly impossible for us to do that exercise. And our staff had then started working on this new act. And let me, give credit to the late Mr. Raymond Amanfu. They did an excellent job on this act.
Putting the act together.
Putting this act together. This act has been instrumental in whatever has been done in the banking industry since 2017. Minus this act, they couldn't have done what they have done. And I believe credit should go to those that credit is due. Raymond Amanfu and his team did a great job at this. This act became ready in September 2016. September 2016. And so by then, decision was then made that by December will be the cutoff date for the access quality review exercise. So come December 2016, new government had come into place. New government said, look, stop everything. And so that ended our tenure. So it is very, very unfair for someone to say your actions taken, all the necessary actions were being taken. The access quality review exercise was being done. It's not the IMF that did it for us.
Why were you doing that? The access quality review, what was the purpose?
So the purpose was to gain the true state of health of all the banks. It's like when you are not well and you go to the hospital and you go to see the doctor. You say, doctor, I'm feeling cold, I have a headache, blah, blah. The doctor doesn't just start administering medication to you. He says, go to the lab. So first of all, they take your BP, they take those basics, they say, go for a blood test. You understand it? All through that exercise, you are still in pain, you are still feeling it. But they necessarily have to wait for the blood test. And then they have a clear idea what kind of treatment to give you. So that's how it works. Even when you detect that a bank is struggling, you don't just move in and close it down. You need to do an audit. Audit the quality of their assets. And then you can project forward and say, no, these people will be solvent, or will not be solvent, and for which decision has to make, it doesn't also mean that you should close them down. There are various ways to resolve banks when they, end into problems. So the exercise was ongoing. It's people who don't understand how things work, who would say we were slow, we were that. The question is, if 9330 wasn't there, how were you going to close down any of those banks that were closed down? No. And you see, we forget another dimension. The 9 banks that were closed down, in terms of their asset size, they have a balance sheet. In terms of their asset size, they were marginal. It constituted just about 12% of industry assets.
All the 9 banks?
Yes, all the 9 banks. So if you have 100 sheep, 12 of them, do you close down the whole farm because 12 sheep, are showing signs of, So it was a marginal problem. And for me, my biggest regret is how we allowed a problem that is just 12% to come and overwhelm us as a country.
I know this because this is if we're in power.
Yes.
But the question then arises, if your administration would have gone about it the way they did, because you did the
access quality review.
So would you have resolved the issues you identified in a manner?
We would have done it differently. And I'll tell you, 2 ways would have done it differently. And there's no way we would have spent a quarter of 25 billion. When I hear that word 25 billion, I just freeze. Because do you know what 25 billion is? 25 billion would have given us, you see the new Rich Hospital. It would have given us 1 Rich Hospital in each of the 16 regions. 4 regions will get a second one. That is what 25 billion could have done at the time. So it's a huge loss that I don't understand why they went that way. And I'll tell you 2 things we would have done differently. First of all, before you close down banks, you need to check how integrated they are. That means do a study of the entire financial sector. See how if you bring them down, to what extent it will impact on other institutions. You needed to be clear in your mind. Then number two, there's something we call systemic importance of banks. So as you see banks, they are not the same. There are some banks that even when they get into problems, you have to look at them a bit differently. Why? Because they are highly integrated with the rest of the country. If you don't consider that, you close them down only to notice that, oh, you also have to go and close down other people at another corner of the country. And it's so in all other countries when banking crisis is being solved, these are the basic principles used. But in ours, that was absent. Now, there's a board resolution. I can show you that document later on. It was signed in September 2016, where the board had made it clear that where we find that a particular bank is systemically important, we should give them forbearance up to 3 years on issues about capital adequacy, on issues about liquidity, corporate governance, and so forth. We should give them forbearance up to 3 years. So for me, if we had continued, one would have made that determination. And so would have seen the linkages, between the institutions in the financial sector. And I mean the banking sector, the securities, the capital market sector, pensions, etc. They are integrated. Would have done that. And I'm telling you that they did the study after they had closed down the very systemic bank, systemically important bank.
So they did the study
after they had closed it down. They closed it down in August, 2018. And I'm not going to mention the particular institution because these things are in court. They closed it down in August 2018. They did that study in November 2018. I have a copy of that study I can show you. And I'm asking, who does that? If you have to weed your farm, do you throw the cutlass before you see whether there are stones in the grass? No. You look out for the stones and then you can assess how much effort, to exert in throwing the cutlass. But in our case, things were just done wholesale. And with a lot of fanfare, as I'll call it, instead of being surgical, look out for the one that you need to, handle differently. And I tell you, CBG, as you see it, that particular bank constitutes about 80% of CBG's, total assets. 80%. So if you have resolved that particular bank well, you understand it, you would have resolved about 80% of the problem well. And so 80% of 25 billion would not have been incurred. You understand it? So this is what we would have done differently. And it would have been simple. So ask me, the systemically important bank, what I would have done with them. It was easy. One, they had supported a number of contractors, who executed projects for government. And so they had what we call receivables. You understand? So when they came in, they said they were auditing those receivables, And I remember at the time, I prompted, I was still in office for 1 year before they asked me to go. And so I remember one day, I went to the office and I went to the governor, the new governor who had come. And I said, Mr. Governor, if really, looking at this bank A, we need some direction from the new government. Because the way I'm seeing it, we need to act fast. You understand it? And I said, can we invite the new finance minister to come over? And he said, why do we have to do so? And I said, no, there are certain steps we have to take immediately. So let him come over. So he did. When the minister came, I remember, we asked him, how much of those receivables have you audited in the case of that particular bank? And he mentioned some amount. He said they had done about 250 or so. And we said, please, can you pay them immediately? Why? Because they had then started failing clearing. There's clearing that takes place each day at Bank of Ghana. All the banks come to clear their checks. Now, because of the rumors across the industry that this bank is about to go out, etc., people were issuing checks to withdraw their monies from them. Now, because clearing was going against them, it was fueling that speculation the more. And so there was a sort of attack on the bank, withdrawals, on the bank. So such a bank, what you do immediately is to make sure that clearing doesn't go against them. Because some people were just testing the waters. You understand it? So the least you want to do is quickly pay them that. Now, even if government said we don't have the funds to pay them, all that you do is take a piece of paper and write on it and say, look, government of Ghana commits to pay you Bank A 500 million in 2 years' time. And then the finance minister signs and says irrevocably, bam. You give them the piece of paper. Bank A will go to any of the big banks in Ghana. And remember at the time, government bonds were, were not like they were now. They were credible, anybody would want to buy into them. Go to 2 or 3 of those strong banks and say, look, at the time, Barclays, for example, is now called ABSA. You say, Barclays, the new government has committed to pay me 500 million in 2 years' time. Okay. But we need city liquidity currently. There is a lot of withdrawals on us. We want to stop failing clearing. So take the 500 million, the face value on the piece of paper, but give us 400 million today. Okay. Then you wait for 2 years and take the 100 million. That would have been good business for Barclays. And then Barclays would have said, well, based on our balance sheet, we cannot do it the entire 500. So can you talk to Stanchart? You understand? So in the end, 2 or 3 banks would syndicate and give that 400 million to Bank A. Now, immediately, the clearing failure on Bank A would have stopped. You understand it? So then the banking halls are working normally. It's only we who would know that there's a problem there that has to be solved. Yeah. Now, why do you do all that? You do all that because they are highly integrated, they are systemically important. What it means is that there are other institutions in the economy, big institutions, who have deposits or placements with them. And you know that if that bank goes down immediately without government injection, you understand, other institutions could fail. That's the concept. Okay. So my point is that one particular bank among them ought to have been treated like that. Okay. That's not to say that the shareholders didn't commit sins. Yeah. They did. But you separate them from the bank. Okay. After stabilizing it with just a piece of paper, like I've explained, you now can move in and say, look, we're actually coming to do a forensic audit. All those who misbehaved, we take you to court. Okay. You can prosecute, jail people, whatever. But then, while at that, the bank as an institution stays. And then with that, you don't have to commit, taxpayers' money into that bank. Okay. You understand it? Because remember, when they took that bank to CBG, government still had to go and capitalize CBG, not so?
Yes.
So what was better? Give them a piece of paper. They use the markets to solve their liquidity problems. You say you won't do. You rather go and put it on government. I don't understand it. When you have a private sector, a market-based solution that is available to you, you say, no, I'm not going to go for it. I'd rather close you down, take the, your net assets to CBG, and then I'll go and put money in there. You understand it? So we would have done that totally differently. And the problem was marginal. Why? Because it was just about 12% of industry assets. Those banks had already, gone out of the clearing system, aside this systemically important bank. All the other 8 banks that were involved, they were no longer part of clearing. Okay. So the industry didn't miss them. They could have just gone away quietly. They had very little deposits, etc. So that problem would have, they could have exited the system even under us without, a lot of fanfare and disruption. But my point is that one particular one among them was not, resolved the appropriate way. And that is why they've spent 25 billion in addressing something we could have addressed very easily. Very, very easily.
Because the entire financial sector suffered for what was done.
Exactly. My question is 12% of industry assets. How do you allow that to become a national crisis?
But they go back and talk about some of the things that were happening in those banks as justification that there was monies that were given to them by the Bank of Ghana that were misused, among others, and said that these banks needed to go.
Senna, when a mosquito lands on your leg, do you take an axe to clear the mosquito? You don't. Yes, people have done wrong things. As I speak to you today, do you know the obnoxious things that have happened in the banking industry? I wish I could mention some examples to you. Yes, obnoxious things have happened. in a number of countries, banks in, today. So those things will always happen. Okay. At the right time, you will do the forensic audit. You punish people who did whatsoever. You will do them. Mm-hmm. But as an institution, remember, they provide jobs. There are related, benefits that other people get. There's the cocoa seller who is able to make some sale each morning because the staff buy from her. There's a security man who is manning one of their branches, and also, various people gain from that bank just still standing. And the point I'm making is that the industry is like a market. Mm-hmm. So there must be freedom of entry and freedom of exit. I understand. Mm-hmm. However, when it comes to exit, certain institutions have to be treated differently. Okay. If you don't treat them differently, you go and commit 25 billion, which is needless. Mm. That's why I said the fact that a mosquito has landed on your thigh doesn't mean you take a big cutlass and cut the mosquito. Mm. You understand? The cost of getting rid of the mosquito becomes unreasonable. Mm. And so we would have solved that problem in a far cheaper way by sticking to the principles. Mm. And these principles, not just in Ghana, it's used everywhere. Mm. The United States of America, they had a banking crisis just recently. Not so. Was it last year or 2 years ago? Yes. They had a crisis. So banking crises are part of the game. This, we haven't seen the last. We will see bank failures again in the future. What's important is that you set up a framework to deal with banking crises when they arise, to ensure that they don't impact on government fiscal position. So you remember in 2016, apart from this law, we also did Act 931, which set up the deposit insurance corporation they have there currently. We set up that institution. We set it up. I took a number of staff to Malaysia to understudy the Malaysian model, and then we came back to set it up. Mm-hmm. It's part of the resolution mechanism we had put in place. So we were not sitting down. 2016, we were putting these structures in place. And our approach is that if we have to resolve a bank, it should have the least cost on the fiscal. Mm-hmm. As much as possible, it should not impact on the fiscal. Mm-hmm. It's possible to do that. And I recommend that going into the future, that should be the approach. Mm-hmm. This thing about I'll close it down, put it on the government fiscal, at the end of the day, you just make life difficult for everybody. Mm-hmm. This is not how it's treated elsewhere. So if you look at how the US resolved that issue, you will understand. Mm-hmm. Initially, they came out and said, look here, no bank, that bank, no. Depositors, you all get your money. You understand it? So they were looking at the bigger picture, but in whatever consideration you make, what should determine what you do is which one will lead to the least cost. Okay. And that is what you go for. Mm. But we did not use those principles in the cleanup exercise. And that is why, we had to commit 25 billion.
Mm. Well, if you join us, our guest this morning is Dr. Asiama. Dr. Johnson Asiama is the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of Ghana, one of the spokespersons for the NDC on matters of finance and the economy. Now, at this point, and when you're preparing a manifesto, one of the things I know you usually do is sit down,
yes,
and look at where we are before prescribing solutions to it. So you have perhaps put together some assumptions in terms of your assessment of where the financial sector is currently. When you did the assessment, what were your conclusions?
So you see, the financial sector is a peculiar sector.
Okay.
It is like the engine that fuels, that keeps the economy running.
Okay.
Now it performs certain functions. So, for example, it promotes financial intimidation. And, I suppose you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
So by performing that financial intimidation function, they promote capital accumulation, which is investment. And then investment also drives growth. Aside that, the financial sector, they administer the payment systems, so you are able to pay for services and receive, the fuel payment system. They help to integrate the country with the rest of the world in terms of trade, and investment. The financial sector also assists the central bank in implementing monetary policy, and so forth and so forth. So the sector plays a critical role, and for which we must always safeguard its health and make sure that they are able to play all these roles I'm talking about. Now, in terms of their role in promoting financial intimidation, currently, what has happened, and I take it that you are aware what happened after the cleanup exercise, the debt exchange, and how it has impacted on the financial sector. You notice that private sector credit, has really gone down, and you can't blame the banks. When you have a very high level of NPLs, I suppose you know what NPLs are, non-performing loans. As I speak to you, the most recent data says it's about 24% across the industry. For the foreign-owned banks, it's about 17 point something, percent. For the local banks, that's about 37%. So what it means is that for the local banks, every loan they give out, every 100 cedis worth of loans they give out, they are not able to collect about 37 cedis out of it, which is very high. And which is far higher than the situation in 2016. Remember 2016, the NPL rates were around 18%, thereabout. So if that was a crisis then, how will you call now, when you are talking about 37% and the likes? So that's why I mentioned that crisis in the sector is a normal part of how things work. What's important is to have the framework in place so that when crisis comes, you are able to resolve it costlessly. You understand it? And then you learn from it, you reform the law, make sure that doesn't happen again, and you move along. So if you look at private sector credit, and if I can just show you one graph. This is a graph, right? So this is a graph showing what we call financial development. There's a way to measure financial sector development. A standard measure is to take your private sector credit as a ratio of your GDP. Okay? So that way you can compare it to other countries and see where you stand. So I have compared Ghana. Ghana is the green line, which is below them. And then above it is Benin, and then Togo, then Kenya. Then you have Sub-Saharan African, average, including South Africa. So you see, Ghana is 12.3%. Private sector as a ratio of GDP. Benin is 17.1%. They are higher. Togo is 27.5%, much higher. Kenya 31.6%. And these are Ghana's peers. So if you have to go by this indicator, what it means is that as at I think the data was up to 2023. As at 2023, these countries, their financial sector is more developed than ours. That's what it means.
And so when you talk about private sector credit,
yes,
what do you mean? As in money
monies advanced by the banks to the private sector. This is DMB's credit to the private sector. And so this goes to confirm what we already see, from the data on Ghana, that we are recording negative growth when it comes to private sector credit, particularly in real terms. And so something needs to be done. In other words, the intermediation role that you expect the financial sector to be playing is, being compromised. And no wonder you are seeing, growth in unemployment. You are seeing job creation. People are not having jobs to do, etc. One of the reasons is that the financial sector is not playing, the kind of role that it should be playing. Now, to illustrate that further, for example, currently Bank of Ghana has imposed some reserve requirements, which are pretty high, 15, 20, 25%. So what it means is anybody who goes to deposit money in a bank, the bank's supposed to go to keep about 25%, with Bank of Ghana. So which is like a tax on financial intimidation. The bank doesn't have that money anymore to lend to Mr. Senna, for Mr. Senna to use to do something he wants to do, currently. So no wonder private sector credit, is suffering. Now, Bank of Ghana may be doing that to draw liquidity. But then the question is, who caused them? Now, who caused them, as we say? Why did they inject so much liquidity in 2022 In fact, they started injecting it from 2019, if I should show you the graph. And particularly in 2022, that massive injection that they did, which could have been avoided if they had insisted that Mr. Finance Minister go and talk to Parliament, because what you are asking for is beyond our mandate. If they had insisted, that injection would not have happened. But sadly, they injected heavily, and now you impose those high reserve requirements on banks.
You're suggesting that the banks are paying for the actions of
Exactly. Why are the banks being made to pay for the actions of Bank of Ghana? And by so doing, financial intimidation is suffering. So these are real issues going forward. That policy is not sustainable unless Bank of Ghana itself is going to begin lending money to the private sector on their own. And you know that is not part of their mandate. So holding on to that stash of money, who is it helping? It's not helping the economy. You know what I mean? So if at all, that situation should be a temporary one. We should be looking ahead. How do we free up the banks? How do we transform the financial sector for it to play that intimidation role more efficiently? Because that is what will drive your economic growth. If you don't do it, it's like you have held growth, you have bound growth with ropes. It's not able to go up. How do we generate the jobs? How do we generate employment? And so these are the things we discussed, together with the other members of the manifesto committee. And so we came out with another, a set of policies that we will use, to free up the financial sector for them to play the intermediation role so as to contribute to accelerated growth.
One of the biggest sectors that has suffered, and I'll come to how you intend to reverse this, is the microfinance sector. But for a lot of small businesses, they are struggling to get that credit to start off. Even when they get the credit, it's at very, very high cost to them. How would you link that to what was done with the banks? Is there a link between the two?
The microfinance sector is, I would treat that separately. I wouldn't add that to the banking sector issue. Because the microfinance problem, you remember how it started. Most of them were operating, under licenses they obtained from the police. Previously there was this money lenders, license, which you could just go to a police station and go and take. So that enabled most of them to be doing their businesses. So most of them were money lenders, in the various communities. Then, if I remember, somewhere in 2009, by then I had left the bank, I was not there. Decision was made that, look, maybe let's formalize that sector. So instead of they just using license from the police, let them be licensed by Bank of Ghana so that we can regulate their activities. Now, probably what probably went wrong was there should have been attention to their numbers. Because as at that time, I don't quite remember, but there were well over 400 companies in that time. And so decision was made, they set some low capital levels for them to formalize, etc., which most of them were able to get. Now, there's the concept that you do not license something you cannot regulate. And so looking back, we should have looked at that. That when you have over 400 firms that are spread all over the country, regulating them will be difficult. Because your staff cannot be with them on a daily basis. And remember, most of them, their scale is very small. So if I send you, for example, to go to the north to go and supervise, go through the books of a microfinance institution, probably your traveling allowance alone is even more than their balance sheet. So it defeats the purpose, And so probably, if there's any lesson at all, it should have been that Bank of Ghana should have been cautious. Because you don't license something you cannot regulate. But by licensing them, and we're not regulating them sufficiently, most of them misapplied the funds. So because they knew that, even if Bank of Ghana staff came today, they will not come again until next year. And so they took the money. Some people, they went to buy plot of land. Some other people went to buy trotro, thinking that, oh, by the time, Bank of Ghana staff will come next year, I would have turned around the money, and then the money gets locked up, etc. So going forward, I think that should be the guiding principle. Okay. Don't license something you cannot regulate. But that said, it tells us something about the psyche of the Ghanaian. That's the second lesson from it, that the average Ghanaian, unless you monitor him or her, 90% of the time they will do the wrong thing. And so the microfinance thing was a very regrettable exercise. In my view, attention should rather have been on the rural banks, because the rural banks, relatively, they've been there since the 70s. So maybe we should have, focused on the rural banks, empower them to rather expand, rather than this. But that said, the microfinance sector has come to stay. They administer to some segment of society. And so going forward, we have to, as I speak, a good number of them are insolvent as we speak. Yes. But for whatever reason, Bank of Ghana is not able to resolve them. Because if they are going to resolve them or close them down, it will mean government will have to pour more money into that. And I'm not sure they have it. So aside the microfinance problem, etc., the issue of local banks is also key. To give you a sense of it, last year, 2023, out of all the profits that were made in the banking industry, 90% of it accrued to foreign-owned banks.
90%?
90%. 90-point-something%, 3 or something.
Profit
of all profits made in the industry accrue to foreign owners. And you know that foreign owners will certainly, send that money abroad. When they are sending it abroad, they go for the dollar. So it's not surprising why our CD is always struggling. Then about 65% of total industry assets is owned by these foreign-owned banks. About 65%. Same thing about banking industry deposits. In other words, foreign ownership dominates the entire industry. Now, when that happens, it is also a national security problem. So it's not only bad for the city, but it's also a national security problem. So given that it is the local banks who do the heavy lifting, they support the SMEs, the small banks, they do that. Foreign-owned banks don't. For most of them, even the credit assessment is not done within here. It's done by somebody living in South Africa or somewhere that you, the applicant of the loan, will not even interface with. So it's only local banks that will drive our growth, whether we like it or not. So even though we have had issues with them, all this banking sector cleanup and what have you, we still need to see how to grow that sector. And so our manifesto has a dedicated section on what to do. And again, that is why President Mahama made the point that he will want to put to rest what has happened by giving a chance to those who feel they've been wronged. If you were a shareholder of a bank that was resolved or whichever way you feel that you were wrong, we'll give you the opportunity. You come for arbitration, we'll hear your story, it will be compared to the exercise that was taken, and then decision reached whether it was fair or not. For those that were wrongly treated and are found to have been wrongly treated, there will be an agreement on what to do with them, so as to put the issue behind us. And then going forward, we can rebuild, the sector. And if you look at our manifesto, we promise to do a number of things, one of which is to set up an equity fund, which is a fund that local banks can tap into, based on certain conditions, so as to recapitalize, if need be. Currently under the fund program, they have the Ghana Financial Stability Fund, which is, meant for a similar thing. But what we want to see is to augment that fund so that we can actually use that, based on a proper, well-established framework. We can support local banks to also be able to compete, The way they are now, they just cannot compete against the foreign ownerships. We have to find a way to strengthen them. We must be committed, for example, to route most of government's transactions through those local banks. Okay. After we so what they need is coaching, dedicated ways of holding their hands. So that they'll be able to compete. And if we do that, as I said, they do the SMEs, and doing SMEs is economic growth, so they can contribute, more. Now, aside that, for the general
on that issue, I'm sure you've heard the MPP's argument that these are matters that you cannot resolve without the courts.
Yes.
That is a decision for the courts to make, not you, whether or not they acted wrongly, and then making a decision whether to return their license to them. How do you respond to that?
They got it totally wrong. Everything is stated in this act.
Okay.
Section 141, 142. It's clear there. It's clear that where a shareholder is aggrieved, you go for arbitration. So in the NDC's manifesto, they stated there that they will operationalize the arbitration center. Okay. You understand? So that people can go for arbitration, and as I explained, it is recognized in the law. That is when they looked at the grievances that the shareholders have, and when the arbitration center comes up with a ruling, it's also as good as a court judgment. So there's nothing set in stone. And by the way, you know that if there's a court judgment on a matter, it's not final. Okay. If a high court rules on a matter, you can always go to a higher court. If you think that the judgment did not consider certain aspects, you can go to an appeals court. Where appeals court still rules against you, if you still feel strongly that there are issues that were not taken on board, you go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court itself, sometimes they vacate their earlier decisions. So let's not just close the pages on people. Remember, these are the rights of individuals and businesses. Their rights are covered under the Constitution. So open the books for them. Do you have any reason why you think things should be looked at again? You understand it? And the panel members will be people who are versed in the law. There will be people who are versed in banking, etc., audit, etc.
So it will not be a matter of come back for your license?
No, not at all. It won't be a discretionary act. It won't be a political solution that says, oh, Senator, come and get one. No, not at all. Everything will be done in line with this law. So those who are arguing like that, please tell them to read section 141, 142 in this act, Act 930. Everything is there.